So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to carry on with our next session, and I'd like to invite Francis Fukuyama and Harris Broumidis to this podium to join me, please. Hi, Frank. Great to see you. Hope you enjoyed last night. Hi, nice to see you.
All good?
Hi. So I'll come here. Why don't you go here, Frank? Yeah.
How are you? How are you?
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, please. We're going to carry on. We're going to continue the conversation about AI, but this time more in the political area and what does it mean for democracy and the world. And I'm joined both by Harris Broumidis, who is CEO of Vodafone Greece. But first of all, we're going to hear from Francis Fukuyama, Senior Fellow for the Center of Democracy and the Development of the Rule of Law at Stanford University. Very familiar to those of you who are regular attendees of this conference, very familiar around the world for his works, for his thinking on democracy and politics in general. So I'm sure you've been reflecting deeply on AI and what it means, how it changes politics, and why don't you kick us off with your broad reflections, and then we can have a conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. It's great to be back in Greece for this conference. So the last panel gave you a pretty positive picture of how technology in general was being used for government. And there's some great examples. It's like this Ukrainian DIA system that was mentioned. So this panel, or I at least, am going to tell you about the bad things in terms of democracy. Before I get to AI, I want to talk about technology in general, because I think that the single thing that has happened as a result of shifting to an online world is the destruction of a common base of empirical knowledge and understanding about the world. And it is very hard to run a democracy if you cannot agree on some basic things like who won the last election. Now, I'm speaking as an American because I think that this process of polarization and democratic decay has actually gone further in the United States than it has in Europe, in most parts of Europe. But it's a warning for the future. So just to give you some examples, if you look at the Republican Party and Republican voters, 70% of them don't believe that Joe Biden was legitimately elected president of the United States in 2020. Over half of Republicans believe some version of the narrative that COVID vaccines are more harmful than helpful, and then about 25%, 20 to 25%, believe some version of the QAnon narrative that the Democrats are actually drinking the blood of children in tunnels under Washington, D.C. Very outlandish. I think that my definition of what populism is actually has to do with conspiracy theories. That populists believe that the world that you see around you, the legacy media, government institutions, all of the big institutions that define a democracy are actually controlled by a shadowy elite, and that the real truth will only appear if you take the red pill and the scales fall from your eyes and you realize that the world is actually very different from what, for example, you see on network television. And I think that this is really a problem, because if 35–40% of the American voting public doesn't believe in the legitimacy of the President of the United States, that is a big problem for democracy. And this is a problem that has been created really by this online world. I think that the dilemma that democracies face is that you have to do content moderation if you are one of the big platforms like Google, Twitter, Facebook, and so forth. But and just to clarify some things, all of these platforms do content moderation. They have to filter out pornography, graphic violence, very gross forms of online content that nobody wants to see. And they've been doing this right from the beginning. The problem occurs when you get into speech that is politically relevant. Who gets to decide what is true speech or what is misinformation? And this has become hugely controversial in the United States. So is raising questions about vaccine efficacy, is that legitimate democratic speech or is that misinformation? And Americans were completely polarized in that particular question. And the dilemma for democracy is the following. You don't, generally speaking, want the government to decide what is true information and what is not. You don't want a ministry of truth. On the other hand, I don't think you want a large private platform that is basically interested in maximizing its own profits to be the arbiter of what's true and what's not. And therefore, the two alternatives that are out there, I think, are both unacceptable in democratic terms. I have a solution to this, which we can get into maybe in the discussion, but that's really the dilemma. Now, this is a transition then into the AI question. You cannot do content moderation without artificial intelligence. It's simply impossible. Every day, billions of photos, blog posts, and so forth are uploaded onto these platforms. It is completely impossible for human beings to manage this quantity of data, and therefore, they have to use AI in order to do the most basic forms of content moderation. And that suggests that actually we're already living in a world that is deeply infused by AI. And I think that a lot of the attitudes towards AI in both Europe and the United States are driven by our bad experience with social media, that social media, has been weaponized by many bad actors, and that's kind of made us very suspicious of any new technology that comes along, and it's led to a desire to regulate AI, I believe, prematurely. This European Act, AI Act that was referenced in the last panel, really doesn't even start with a catalog of what the harms are that it's trying to avoid. Everybody has a general feeling that this is a dangerous technology that's going to take away your job, but is that really what the object of this kind of regulation is? I also think that at this point, it's very hard to even think about regulating it because the cat is out of the bag. AI is not being produced by, 3 or 4 giant companies the way social media is. With open source AI, everybody in the world is working on a smaller language model that builds on the LLMs that exist. Final thing I'll say is there's going to be a lot of difficulty in regulating this phenomenon. I always think that the fears about AI, it's a little bit like saying, well, in 1880, when Thomas Edison had just turned on the first light bulb, asking him, what do you think the consequences of electricity are going to be? Right? In 100 years, what are the consequences? There's simply no way of knowing, and it means that as harms develop and as we develop more information about what specific problems we want to solve that are created by this technology, we are going to have to adjust the social and political rules that surround this technology. And this is not something that can be done by writing a lot of rules in advance. This is the way that bureaucracies typically operate. You're going to need much more discretionary decision-making on the part of regulators that are scrambling to keep up with this technology. So the European regulation, for example, specifies a number of parameters above which you want to regulate a large language model. This is completely crazy to think that you can actually put a number in a regulation right now that won't be made completely obsolete, not in a couple of years, but next week. So I think these are some of the challenges we face, but my personal opinion is we ought to be a little bit, we need to wait and see, and we need to be a little bit less frightened of this particular future that we are about to enter into.
So I'm confused. On the one hand, you start by saying this is deeply worrying, and on the other hand, you say we should be a little bit less frightened.
Well,
so I'm not quite sure where on the Richter scale of fear I should be situated.
What I was trying to say was that in order to solve the first problem created by social media and the online world, you actually are going to need some of these AI tools. And it's one example of a positive use of AI that will actually be very important in combating the harms that were caused by this earlier generation.
So it's a mixed and discerning picture that you need to, a rather subtle approach to, not a knee-jerk approach. I wonder if you could just look, and I want to come onto your solution, because you dangled that there, because that's intriguing. But in this particular election cycle in the United States, there were in advance of, and it seems interminable, it hasn't finished, it's still got longer to go than most normal countries have for their entire election cycle, but we've already had, I don't know how many months. People were very worried at the outset that AI was going to distort all sorts of things, that you would have AI-enabled deep fakes and what have you, that would really sow confusion among the electorate. My impression is that, by and large, no more than in an usual electoral cycle, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, frankly, there's so much crap out there already before you get to AI. I mean, the polarization is so vicious and so deep. Yeah. So yeah, AI is going to produce deep fakes, and it's going to further erode people's trust in institutions. But that trust was gone way before AI got on the scene. And I think actually people are so aware of this distrust problem that they've actually singled out instances where deep fakes have been used. Doesn't mean it's not going to grow as a problem, but I think we're already we're already deep in it even before this.
I mean, I think Biden speaking the other day was probably an AI, not the real Biden, right?
I'm sure, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Broumidis, tell us about, I'm assuming that from Vodafone's perspective, it's a lot more positive, and you're going to tell us a good story about AI.
Yeah, good afternoon, Daniel, Francis. So in your previous question, I'm much more on the positive side of the spectrum. And if, when we talk about democracy, let's think what are the heated debates today when it comes to AI. It is about, ethics and values. It is about the future of work, and it is about concentration of power. All of them are deeply connected with the foundations of our democratic system. So when it comes to ethics and values and what we may call responsible deployment of AI, of course, the risks, like any other invention, are very, very high. In every human invention up to now, there were side effects and risks associated with that. On internet, for example, we had the challenges on security and privacy. When it comes to AI, there are much more than that. So there is the risk of bias, because all AI algorithms are based on certain patterns of data that they are already biased. It is about reliability and safety, because imagine a driverless car to be driven by AI should be reliable and safe. And going beyond that, it's about accountability, who is accountable. So the algorithm should be accountable for any harm. And the ones developing the algorithm should be accountable to us all about this one. And we need to think that, we need regulation. We are expecting the AI Act from the European Union, from the European Commission, which is going to be the first cross-sectoral AI regulation in place. In the US and in the UK, it was rather sectoral rather than cross-sectoral. And we need to, to be in a dynamic process in order to make sure that, all these challenges will be mitigated. The good thing is that humanity has been proven extremely resilient and adaptable in all big changes up to now. So on future of work, I'm much more optimistic because, think what it happened when the horse carriage was replaced by car. A few professions were disappeared, but a whole new ecosystem of roles arised. An example from Vodafone, in the next 18 months, we are going to deploy 7,000 new roles that they were not existent before, from AI cybersecurity experts to AI trainers. And we are going to do that through upskilling, through insourcing and recruitment. And guess what? These roles will be much higher paid than a role of an agent in a call center.
How many did you say? Could you repeat the number?
7,000 in
7,000.
Vodafone in the next 18 months, roles that they
And to put that in context, what is that as a share of your total workforce?
It's 7% if you think that we are 100,000 globally, so it's 7%. So I believe that AI will amplify jobs. Of course, repetitive jobs will be replaced, but the value add of the new roles will have an increment also on the way we compensate these roles. And the last bit is around concentration of power. One might say that US, China, or the big West Coast companies, because they have loads of data, they are able to create very powerful AI algorithms, so they will prevail. For me, definitely they do have a head start, but I think that the US is less than 25% of GDP globally, and I don't think that this, in terms of data creation, is able to, because the notion of data being gold or oil, I don't necessarily agree. It's valuable as oil and gold, but data is not that scarce. And data is renewable, someone said, is the only renewable resource that we have in the world. So even smaller organizations, even smaller companies, they can take advantage of this, create this type of models and compete. Of course, if we reach a point that the all-in economy prevails, which is about concentration of power, then we may start thinking on how we democratize data the same way we democratized electricity, for example. Of course, it's not the same, but if we go to a phase that this all-in economy will prevail, then the humanity needs to think how it will sustain competition between states, between organizations, even between individuals. I'm closing with the caveat. And the caveat is that whatever we discuss today, what we discussed yesterday, we will be discussing tomorrow, maybe will be obsolete or wrong in 10 years from now. The good side of it is that we have time to adapt and change.
Maybe in 10 weeks from now at the spate of. I just wanted to ask you a question about, I have this in my pocket. I think it's actually got a Vodafone system linked to it. You'll be pleased to hear. How much AI am I actually using without realizing it in my daily use of this phone?
AI is all around us, everywhere. Gen AI is progressing exponentially. So we use, for the last few years, we are using AI in Vodafone, in network, primarily, in customer service, and in HR. And we were able, by using AI in the network, to provide a better service, because AI can prevent or abolish network disruptions, makes the connectivity of the cities in fixed much smarter. It consumes less energy. And then on customer service, today, just in Vodafone Greece, 250,000 calls are answered by the chatbot, and the 2/3 of these calls are handled at the level of the chatbot without the need to be transferred.
So it strikes me that it's not a question of AI or not AI. AI is all around us, as you say. You could almost add an R onto the end of AI. It's like the air that we breathe. And so really at issue here is that part of it, or those consequences of it that may be problematic, is where we're really debating, because we can't wish it away. It's so deeply embedded. So that's where I turn to you, Francis, about your solution for the political problem that you think this is creating. We need to know.
Before I get into that, can I just add on to something? I very much agree about this more positive expectation for what's going to happen to the labor market. I'll just give you an analogy. Many economists will argue that the introduction of computers actually increased inequality by increasing the returns to education and specialized knowledge. And that is true in one respect, but there's another respect in which the shift to an information age vastly increased equality, and that has to do with female employment. Because when the average job does not involve lifting a heavy object on a factory floor, but sitting in front of a computer, turns out that women are actually better than men of comparable, backgrounds and intelligence and so forth in sitting behind that computer. They're actually going to show up for work on time. They're not going to have all these behavioral problems that especially young men have and so forth. And that means that beginning in the late 60s, hundreds of millions of women all over the world entered the paid workforce. And that was a huge increase in human equality brought on by this technological revolution that is usually not captured in these, economist studies of the impact of. So that's one thing. So to get to the question of what to do about the content moderation, I don't think that either the government or these big platforms is the appropriate decider as to what's legitimate information. I led a Stanford working group on platform scale back in 2020, and we issued a report that recommended something we called middleware. Instead of giving that power to the government or to a big platform, our view was that you ought to open up the APIs of the big platforms and allow a third-party content moderation that would be a competitive market where the user could choose the parameters of what they saw on their Twitter feeds or Facebook feeds and that sort of thing. And that was the original vision of the internet. Users ought to be able to control what they saw, and instead you've got this monopoly by three big platforms that controls what people see and oftentimes leads them to very bad content. The problem is we didn't see a business model, but a lot of people are working on this because I think anyone that's thought about the problem of content moderation kind of realizes that middleware is about the only way to go forward where you could take away the power of these platforms to actually, determine political outcomes, like Elon Musk buying Twitter.
Power to the people.
Right.
Very good. Well, I think that's all we have time for, so I think we have to end it there. But I think that what I do sense from this is that we're going to be back here again and again trying to puzzle out what to do about AI. And that's it's with us, it's important, it's going to be posing all sorts of conundrums. But thank you for helping us start to see through it. Thank you very much.